Hi, Phil Lister here of Lister Model Works, and this is Volume 5 of our Model Crafter series. Wow, Volume 5. Hard to imagine we're up to 5 volumes already. Yes, this is the video series that feeds your addiction on modeling and begs the question, do I really have to make that rent or mortgage payment this month? Couldn't I just buy a few more kits? Yeah, like that would really go over big, wouldn't it? Anyway, in this volume, we're going to build and paint a 1:1 scale resin bust produced by Blackheart Enterprises. It's the Curse of the Werewolf bust. This is a fantastic bust. And come to think of it, that is too. But this is a fantastic bust, sculpted by master sculptor Joe Simon. I'd like to thank George Stevenson of Blackheart Enterprises for supplying this great bust for this video.
Okay, this is the bust once I've had it primed. I just used some gray primer. As a matter of fact, I know normally I use a primer made by Walmart or put out by Walmart. In this particular instance, however, I decided to go with some Krylon. I'll have to admit, I mean, Krylon is a better primer than the Walmart stuff. Now, the first order of business, once the primer's been done, or the primer's been added, is I mixed up a very pale flesh tone, and I decided to airbrush that on. And I'm not going to cover the formula simply because I've covered formulas before in other videos, and I'm sure by now most of you have your own formulas that you use. And once I had the flesh tone in the airbrush, I set the air pressure to about 20-25 psi, and using my Badger Anthem airbrush, I just started airbrushing the flesh tone all over the bust. You just want to try to get even coverage. You want to make sure that you get it all into the nooks and crannies, all around the eye sockets, around the nose, under the nose. And don't be afraid to feather it into the hair, because you want to make sure that all the flesh tone areas are covered all the way up to the hairline. And again, you just want to make sure you get plenty of even coverage. And here's the bust once the flesh tone has been airbrushed on, and as you can see, it is a very pale flesh tone. And that was done because when I come back with the pastel chalks, you apply the pastel chalks in strategic areas, but when you take your blending brush and you go into all the little areas with the blending brush, you're blending or pushing the pastel chalks around all over the face, and that will darken the face overall. So I'm compensating for that added darkness, if you will, by starting out with a very pale flesh tone. And the next phase will be to base coat the hair with a dark gray, and I'm going to use the airbrush and I'm going to follow along the hairline with that. So the next phase was to mix up a rather dark gray And I'm using a dark gray as a base tone because I'm going to dry brush the highlights onto the hair. And of course, dry brushing is a dark to light process. Over a darker base coat, you're going to come back with a lighter shade and dry brush that color. And for the hair, I again decided to airbrush that on. So I decided, to use the Badger Anthem once again for that. And I'm also checking the paint flow here just to make sure that there's no clogging or anything like that. As you can see, I'm able to airbrush some rather fine lines. And that was the checking was also done again because in this particular instance, I knew I had to get closer to the surface because as I'm airbrushing it onto the hair, I'm trying to create a very soft edge effect where the flesh tone and the hair come together. So that was the whole point of that. And you just want to try to make sure that that all you're really doing is hitting those hair areas and trying to keep the gray off of the fleshy areas as much as possible. And here's the bust once the flesh tone has been painted and all the hair has been base coated. Now the next phase will be to come back with the pastel chalks and using a darker flesh tone, I'm going to then apply those pastel chalks into the recessed areas. So basically I'm using a brown color and I'm rubbing that onto some sandpaper because again we're using the pastel powder, and I'm taking one brush and I'm getting some of the powder onto the brush, and basically you just want to get the pastel chalks into those recessed areas. And once you get enough of the chalk onto those areas or into those little crevices, you can start by feathering it out somewhat. So you take the brush and you just sort of start spreading it around a little bit so that you can soften those edges. You want a very soft transition into those shadowy areas. You don't want a very hard line. You don't want it to look like war paint. So you want a very soft, organic sort of look. And again, this is why by starting with the lighter flesh tone, by the time you add the darker pastel chalks into all those areas, and then when you start feathering it out, the overall fleshy areas are going to darken somewhat. So again, by compensating, I'm keeping those areas as light as possible while still maintaining the integrity of those dark, shadowy areas. You just want to apply enough of the chalk into those areas, and then using the same brush, you start to feather those areas out. Then once you have all the pastel chalks on, you can then come back with a wider, softer brush and further refine those areas and soften those edges, because again, you want that gradual effect. You don't want any hard lines there. And of course, by the time this brush applies the pastel chalks and spreads it around, you're going to darken those overall flesh colors. The next phase now will be to dry brush the fur areas, and again I'm taking a lighter shade of the base color of the fur, and I'm now dry brushing over those areas to really bring out all the texture in those areas. And you just want to take that all the way up to the hairline. And again, a lighter shade is allowing all that texture to just come right on through. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Dry brushing is very important. Sculptors spend a great deal of time in sculpting a lot of texture and detail into these models, and by dry brushing you're really making all that stand out, pop out. And here's, once the fur texture has been dry brushed, you can see a huge difference from the just the base coat. Now the next phase will be to paint the shirt areas that were sculpted into the model. And here, once the shirt's been painted, I actually, what I did was I airbrushed those areas, and I ended up having to come back with the gray paint and even the dry brush color, and I touched up the areas where the fur overlaps the shirt and the collar. I'm now using the Badger Anthem to take some of the pale flesh color, and I'm coming back onto all the raised areas of the face. This allows more contrast between the shadow areas and the lighter areas. Plus, it also helps to soften those pastel edges a little bit more, because there's going to be some overspray that's going to carry on into those areas. So that's going to help to soften everything. It's helping to increase contrast, but it can also help to decrease the contrast somewhat too, because of the overspray. And again, you want that real soft, organic look. You don't want a lot of hard edge lines. You just want to work very carefully and slowly. Keep your air pressure set rather low when you're working this close. You want to make sure your air pressure is down to about 10 to 15 psi, sometimes even less. But that also depends on your paint mixture. You got to make sure that your paint is mixed just right for that. And here you can see how by adding those highlights, everything's starting to pop out. Now the next phase is to paint the mouth. I decided that I was going to use a rather dark pink color, and the idea was, of course, to paint the gums as well as the lip areas. So I decided I was going to airbrush those, because especially around the lip areas, I wanted a softer transition where the lips and the face come together. So as you can see, the gums have been painted, and now using the airbrush, I can now paint the lip, or the lips, and because this is being done freehand with an airbrush, I'm getting a very soft transition effect. I also painted the eyes a dark pink color. And you'll notice the face looks rather shiny, and that's because I applied some Tester's dull coat and it hasn't quite dried all the way yet. Now here, the teeth have been based out in a rather dark ivory color, and I was very careful when painting the teeth to make sure that the lines of the teeth where they meet the gums are very well defined. And that's important because obviously we're talking about two different things here. And here I'm applying some Future Floor Wax, which is a very good gloss coat, over the whole area. I'm going to come back with some grunge color, and also when I apply the blood, sometimes working with a gloss finish allows you to do wash effects much better than over a flat finish. Trying to do washes can be difficult at best, and sometimes though, working with a glossy surface and even gloss paints for a wash, sometimes that can be a lot easier. Just want to make sure you get plenty of nice coverage of that clear finish. Now for blood, which obviously I'm going to apply to the mouth, I use Tamiya Clear Red, and I also add a little bit of the Tamiya Clear Green, which helps to darken the color, and this gives the blood mixture a more realistic tone, which obviously in 1:1 scale is what you're trying to achieve. And at first I took the mixture, the blood mixture, and I started to apply it around the teeth. And I tried to be very strategic at first, and so I went in around all the areas, the little, you know, where each tooth came together at the gum, and I just went through each one and applied a little bit using a very soft, very small brush. And then the next phase was to start, which was to get a little bit heavier with the application, because it's to look like he's just taking a bite out of somebody. So here I've got blood dripping out of his mouth, and again I just used the Tamiya clear mixture. And the next phase, while that was drying, was to apply white, or a rather off-white, to each eye. I then came back with some red pastel chalk, and I applied that to the corners of each eye, and a little bit around the top and the bottom of the eye. And then here I went over the teeth again with a slightly lighter shade. It was kind of like an off-white to brighten the teeth a little bit. And then I applied a little bit more grunge to the base of each tooth. And then I just glossed everything up with Future Floor Wax. Now when it came to the eyes, I decided to use cutouts, and some may consider this cheating, but I wanted to make sure I had plenty of detail in the eyes, so I simply printed out some human eyes and I cut them out, and I took each one, and using a decoupage method, which is I took some white glue, thinned it down a little bit, applied the glue mixture to the back of the cutouts, and then I simply glued them in place once I had the position set. And I wanted each eye to be looking up and just slightly to the right. Now instead of using Future Floor Wax to gloss up the eyes, I used some 5-minute clear epoxy. And you want to be careful if you're using this method. You want to make sure you don't mix it up too vigorously, because you want to try to keep the air bubbles down to a bare minimum. And then you just simply use a toothpick to apply the mixture to each eye, and then come back with a brush that you know you're going to end up throwing away. And you just want to spread that epoxy mixture all around the eye area. You want to make sure it gets, you know, into each of the corners. You just want to spread it around real good, but make sure that you've got plenty on there to really cover it well. And that 5-minute epoxy will add such a gloss, it's not even funny. Talk about realistic looking eyes. That 5-minute epoxy does a great job. You could even use the 5-minute epoxy over the teeth if you wanted to. Now, the model does come with a nameplate, and what I've done here so far is I've primed the nameplate using a black, and I'm coming back now with a dark chocolate brown mixture, and I'm airbrushing the dark brown over the entire nameplate. The object here is, starting with a dark brown, I'm then going to come back and I'm going to dry brush the nameplate using a bronze mixture. And I wanted the, you know, the kind of the antique looking bronze look. So I just very carefully dry brushed the bronze mixture over the nameplate. And again, what that's doing is it's bringing out the detail in that nameplate, because it's allowing all the lettering to stand out from the background of the nameplate. And again, remember that dry brushing is always a dark to light process, which is why I use the dark brown mixture as a base coat. And again, you just want to scrub the surface, and you don't want to apply it real heavily, but you want to make sure you get enough on there so that you can read the lettering really well. And there it is, with the bronze finish added. And I wanted to add patina effect, which is an oxidation that occurs with metals, and especially bronze. Bronze will age or oxidize in a kind of a pale green color. So I mixed up a pale green color, and I'm taking off the excess paint, and I'm going again to I'm going to dry brush this patina mixture over the nameplate. And again, this just helps weather it and age it, give it a little bit more character, I guess you could say. And again, you just want to simply apply the patina much like you did with the bronze color over the nameplate, and you just want to hit it in strategic areas. You don't have to be evenly, you don't have to apply it evenly at all here. You can hit one area a little bit heavier than another area, because again, the patina effect is going to take place in different degrees over different areas of the nameplate. So you just want to make sure that you apply enough of it so it has that aged, oxidized look. And you can apply as much or as little patina as you want if you even, opt to use the patina effect. Once you have your nameplate done, the bust is ready to display. You can mount the bust and the nameplate onto a backing and then hang it onto the wall, or you can simply hang the bust up and then stick the nameplate under it.